Stuck in my office pantry with my rival for 12 hours. You know, one of those days where you feel cursed from the start. Yeah? This was one of them. I woke up late, missed the train, didn't have time to grab coffee. And by the time I rolled into work, Sergei freaking Laurent was already holding court in the conference room again. There he was, dazzling the team with his brilliant ideas and impeccable charm. Ugh, couldn't the guy just take a day off from being perfect? Every time he opened his mouth, it was like the universe leaned in to say, "Look how great Sergei is." Every time I opened mine, it felt like the universe replied with a resounding, "Meh." The day dragged on like that. One long string of minor annoyances, topped with Sergei's annoying perfection. My lunch got swapped in the fridge, again. My email server crashed, and I spent 30 solid minutes trying to fix the office printer before realizing it was unplugged. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I was dead on my feet and ready to bolt. But first, I needed to grab the stash of granola bars I kept in my pantry. I'd skipped lunch. I had no way I was making it through the commute without a snack. My trusty granola bars were waiting in the pantry. So I headed there, hoping to avoid any more human interaction. Of course, the universe had other plans. I stepped into the pantry, already reaching for my stash, when I noticed someone else was there. "Forget something." The smooth, unmistakable French voice made my stomach twist. I turned and yep, there he was, Sergei Laurent, leaning against the counter like he owned the place. Blonde hair perfectly tousled, blue eyes sparkling with the usual smugness. "Nope," I muttered, grabbing my granola bar. I was about to bolt when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then they went out completely. The room plunged into darkness. "Seriously?" I muttered, fumbling for the door. I grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't budge. "Try pushing," Sergei said behind me. I pushed. Nothing. "Locked," I said through gritted teeth. Sergei sighed. I could hear him moving closer. "Let me try." I stepped away, and he jiggled the handle, then gave a firm shove. Nothing. "Wow, what a hero," I said, crossing my arms. "You saved the day. Not my fault you can't work a door." He shot back, his tone breezy. I glared at him. "It's jammed, not broken." "Sure," he said, a smirk tugging at his lip. "If it helps you sleep at night." "Okay, this isn't funny," I said, my voice rising. I pounded on the door. "Hello? Anyone out there?" No answer. I pulled out my phone. But of course, no signal in this corner of the building. Great. Just great. "Relax," Sergei said, like it was helpful. "We'll just wait for someone to notice we're missing." "Right," I said, spinning around to glare at him. Because people are totally going to panic about 2 coworkers not showing up at happy hour." He quirked an eyebrow. "You think they'd panic if you didn't show up?" "You think they'd panic if you didn't show up? That's adorable." I threw up my hands. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Irreplaceable. Forgive me for not being a human magnet like you." He laughed softly, the sound annoyingly warm in the cramped space. "Careful, Ansel." That almost sounded like a compliment. "Dream on." "Help me look for something," I said, already groping around in the dark. "Maybe there's a tool or something to pry open the door." We started searching, bumping into shelves and each other. I found a box of plastic forks. He found a half-empty bottle of hand sanitizer. "Unless you plan to grease the doors of that," I said, holding up a fork. "This is useless." "Your ideas aren't much better," he shot back, gesturing to me my fork. "Wow, thanks for your expert opinion," I snapped. He leaned against the counter again, that insufferable smirk still plastered on his face. "You know, if you didn't hate me so much, this would almost be fun." I stared at him incredulous. "You're unbelievable. And you're predictable," he said, folding his arms. Freak out, snap at me, sulk, rinse and repeat. I glare at him. "If I'm predictable, then you're insufferable." He laughed again, softer this time. "Good thing we've got all night to settle this thing." I sighed, leaning my forehead against the door. Of course, because what could possibly make this cursed day worse than being trapped in with Sergei Laurent for the night? An hour later. An hour. An entire hour. That's how long Sergei and I spent trying every possible way to get the pantry door open. We tried shoving it, pulling it, kicking it. At one point, Sergei even suggested we ram it together, which resulted in both of us hitting the door shoulder first and nearly knocking each other out. Spoiler, the door didn't budge. Then we moved on to tools, or more accurately, whatever random junk we could find at the pantry. My brilliant idea was to use the plastic forks to wedge the lock. Total failure. Sergei's attempt to unscrew the door handles with a butter knife. Equally useless. Total failure. This isn't working, I finally said. Sinking onto the floor, my back hit the wall, and I stared at the dark ceiling, completely done with life. No kidding, Sergei muttered. Flopping down on the other side of the cramped space, he stretched his long legs out in front of him, taking up way too much room as usual. For a few minutes, we just sat there, panting slightly from the effort and glaring at the uncooperative door like it had personally wronged us. Well, we've exhausted all our brilliant ideas, I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. What now, genius? Now? Sergei leaned his head back against the wall, looking oddly relaxed for someone stuck in a glorified closet. Now we wait. Wait? For what? A miracle? The power? Or someone to notice we're gone? He smirked even in the dim light. Maybe you should work on being more memorable, Ansel. Then someone might miss you. I rolled my eyes. Oh, sure. Let me take notes from Mr. Office Celebrity over here. He chuckled, and to my surprise, the sound wasn't as annoying as usual. Silence fell between us after that, and for once, it wasn't entirely unbearable. So we sat there, two exhausted, slightly bickering coworkers, waiting for rescue, or at least the lights to come back on. 2 hours later. 2 hours of mostly silence, broken by the occasional sarcastic jab from Sergei or me. I'd like to say it was peaceful, but let's be real. Nothing about being stuck with Sergei Laurent screams peaceful. I was doing my best to ignore him, staring at the wall like it held the answers to life. When it happened, my stomach let out a loud, obnoxious growl that echoed the small pantry. I froze, heat creeping up my neck. Sergei, of course, didn't miss a beat. You should eat, he said casually, not even looking at me. You didn't have lunch. I blinked at him. How did you know? I paused, frowning. Wait, how do you know I didn't have lunch? He glared at me, and his face had that usual smugness, but his tone was different. Softer, maybe. You always bring that sad excuse for a sandwich. Didn't see it today. Besides, you were running on fumes since this morning. I stared at him, completely off guard. You noticed that? He shrugged, like it was no big deal. Noticed you snapping at everyone in the printer queue? Too hard to miss. His voice was light, teasing, but there was something else there. Concern? Nah, couldn't be. I felt my face heat up and quickly looked away, pretending to focus on my granola bar in my hand. Thank you for the observation, I guess. Sergei didn't respond, but I caught him smirking in the corner of my eye. I fumbled with my wrapper, my fingers suddenly clumsier than usual. Why did that feel like a compliment? And why was my face burning, like I stepped out of a sauna? I bit into my granola bar, avoiding his gaze. Nope, not going there, not tonight. Flashback. Over a year ago, the first time I saw Sergei Laurent, he didn't just walk into the office. He arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in my usual spot at my desk, nursing my second cup of coffee, and barely awake. The chatter around me shifted, like a ripple through water. I glanced up, and there he was, tall, blonde, and annoyingly gorgeous. Sergei looked like he'd stepped out of a glossy magazine instead of the subway. He had his air about him, like he knew exactly where he was going and didn't care who was in his way. It wasn't just his look either. It wasn't just the way he moved. Confident, but not cocky. Well, not yet. He introduced himself to the team with a light French accent that made half the room swoon. Sergei Laurent, he said, with a polite smile, shaking hands like he'd already memorized everyone's names. When he got to me, his crystal blue eyes met mine. My brain short-circuited. Ansel. Ansel, I said, almost dropping my coffee. Great first impression. Ansel, he replied. Ansel, he repeated, like he was testing my name. His smile lingered just a second longer than necessary before he moved on to the next person. I spent the rest of my day trying not to think about him, and failing spectacularly. It wasn't just he was stupidly attractive. There was something about the way he carried himself, poised but approachable, that I couldn't shake. He was the kind of guy who probably volunteered at soup kitchens and rescued stray kittens in his spare time. I told myself it was just a passing crush, one of those fleeting things that you would burn out in a week. But then he started showing up to meetings with these brilliant ideas, throwing around suggestions that somehow made everyone's plan look dull in comparison. And just like that, Sergei Laurent went from crush-worthy coworker to completely out of my league. About 8 months later, months passed, and the crush was still there, buried underneath layers of irritation and self-doubt. By that point, Sergei had cemented himself as the office golden boy. Every presentation he gave was flawless. Every pitch he made landed perfectly. It wasn't just enough that he was good at his job, he made it look effortless. Me? I had to claw my way through every project, sweating over details and triple-checking my work. And no matter how hard I tried, Sergei always seemed one step ahead. What made it worse was the teasing. He wasn't mean about it. He was too polished for that. But he had his way of dropping comments that got under my skin. Nice attempt, he'd say, after one of my presentations. His tone light enough to sound harmless. I would have gone with something more dramatic. But it's not bad. Or, you're improving, Ansel. Keep it up. Like I was some intern he was mentoring. It drove me insane. At first I thought he was trying to one-up me, proving he was better at everything. But over time I started noticing other things. The way he always sat near me in meetings, even when there were other empty chairs. How he'd bring me a cup of coffee without asking, claiming it was an extra. Or how he'd listen, really listen, when I spoke, even when everyone else in the room was distant. And yet every time I let myself think he might actually like me, he'd turn around and outshine me in something else. I convinced myself he only saw me as competition. Someone to beat, someone as perfect as Sergei, couldn't possibly want someone like me. So I did the only thing I could. I buried the crush deeper and worked harder, pretending the way my chest tightened around him was just frustration. It was easier that way, or so I thought. Flashback ends. At some point, I must have dozed off. I was sitting there, back against the wall staring at the dark ceiling, and the next thing I knew, my head was bobbing forward. Hey, Sergei's voice snapped me awake. Don't doze off on me. I blinked over at him, and he was frowning, like he was actually concerned. What? I mumbled, trying to rub the sleep out of my eyes. You're shivering, he said, his tone softer than usual. I hadn't even realized how cold it had gotten. But now that you mention it, the chill had settled in deep. I'm fine, I said, but it came out more like a half-heated protest. He didn't buy it. Come on, you're freezing. And don't even try to act tough. I know you're not the bravest in the dark. I blinked again, not sure how to respond to that. It was a jab, sure, but it wasn't the usual teasing. There was something else behind it. Something concerned. I chuckled, more out of a reflex than anything else. Bravest in the dark? Really? You trying to make me feel better? Or is this just your go-to insult? Sergei's lips twitched, like he was holding back a grin, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stood up, and without warning, moved to sit next to me. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to keep my face neutral, but I was definitely aware of the fact that Sergei Laurent, the guy who had spent the last year making my life difficult, was sitting inches away from me. My mind was racing. He was too close, but I couldn't pull away. I couldn't exactly say anything without sounding like an idiot. You should keep yourself warm, Sergei said, pulling his jacket a bit tighter around his shoulders before draping part of it over me. Don't want you to catch a cold in here. I had no idea how to respond to that. Instead, I shrugged and tried to ignore the way my heart was suddenly beating in my chest. There was a long, quiet pause, and for once, it wasn't uncomfortable. You know, I always thought you were messing with me, I said, trying to break the silence. Teasing, always trying to be the better guy. Sergei was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. I wasn't trying to be better. I was worried about not being good enough. That hit me like a ton of bricks. What? Yeah, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I always felt like I had to prove myself, I'd see you do things, and I thought, if I can't be better than him, I won't measure up. I stared at him, completely shocked. All this time I thought Sergei was some kind of overconfident jerk who saw me as competition. But now, hearing this, I felt like I was seeing him in a whole new light. I used to think you were just a douchebag, I blurted out before I could stop myself. But I trailed off, unsure of how to finish. He raised an eyebrow, but I continued, swallowing hard. Maybe you're not the biggest one I know? Sergei laughed, low and genuine, and for the first time, I didn't mind hearing it. In fact, it felt like maybe, just maybe I was starting to understand him. A few hours later, the pantry was suffocatingly small, the air thick with tension. Hours had passed since we last spoke, and despite the silence, the energy between Sergei and I was crackling. We were sitting closer now, the cold air pressing us together, and neither of us seemed willing to move. I couldn't deny how much my body was reacting to him. Every subtle move he made, every quiet breath. The space between us felt like it was shrinking by the second, and I was finding it harder to keep my focus. You look uncomfortable, Sergei said, his voice low, almost teasing. I shot a look at him, but I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. I'm fine, I muttered, trying to dismiss the way my heart was hammering in my chest. But Sergei wasn't letting it slide. He leaned in a little, his body close enough that I could feel the heat from his skin. Really, because you're not looking so fine. I swallowed, feeling his presence take over the small space. I was getting nervous. Every part of me wanted to pull away. But another part, the part I quite couldn't control, was drawn to him. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw something. I saw something that made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't explain. Without warning, he reached out gently, brushed a strand of hair away from my face, his fingers lingering against my skin. You don't need to hide it, he whispered, his voice dripping lower. Smoother, his voice dripping lower. Smoother. My breath caught, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. His touch was electric, sparking something inside me I couldn't fight. Slowly, I leaned into him, our bodies nearly pressed together. Sergei's lips hovered dangerously close to mine, his warm breath mingling with mine. This was a bad idea, I said, barely able to form the words. He smirked, his lips brushing against mine in the slightest. Teasing, maybe? But I've never been good at following the rules. My heart skipped and slammed against my ribs, and I blushed so hard I thought my face might catch fire. I pulled back quickly, my brain screaming at me to create some distance. But Sergei caught my wrist, his hands gentle but firm. Okay, he said, raising his other hand in a mocking surrender. His expression softened, teasing the glint in his eye, replaced with something quieter. I won't tease you anymore. Just don't go. Okay? I hesitated, my heart racing as he tugged me back down toward him. It's freezing in here, he added, his voice calm but insistent. We'll both freeze if we sit apart. Stay with me. There was something so sincere in his tone, so uncharacteristically vulnerable, that I couldn't argue. I settled back beside him, feeling his warmth seep into my skin. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence between us wasn't tense. It wasn't awkward. It was just comfortable. The next morning, I woke up slowly, still groggy, and the first thing I noticed was warmth. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and all I could feel was Sergei, his arms draped over me, his chest pressed against my back. The soft rhythm of his breathing tickled the back of my neck. I didn't want to move. The cold pantry seemed distant, and all that existed was this warmth cocooning me. My eyes fluttered. Just a crack. My eyes fluttered open, just a crack. But everything was blurry, dreamlike. That's when I felt something, soft brushing against my lips. My brain barely registered it, before my body responded instinctively, leaning into the sensation. The touch grew firmer, more deliberate. It was slow, warm, and blissful. My heart started pounding, but I couldn't stop myself. My hands moved on its own accord, brushing against his jaw as the kiss deepened. And then, like a bucket of ice water, it hit me. This wasn't a dream. I jerked back so fast I nearly hit my head on the shelf behind me. My eyes snapped open, and there he was, Sergei Laurent, staring right at me. His face was unreadable, calm but intense, like he was waiting for me to say something. My mouth opened and closed uselessly as I tried to form words. You, how? I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. My brain was short-circuiting. All I could do was gasp at him like an idiot. Before either of us could say anything, the door cracked open, and a bright beam of light flooded the pantry. A voice called out, "Oh, there you two are!" I jumped up so fast it made my head spin. "Thank you," I blurted to whomever opened the door, not even looking at them. Without another glance at Sergei, I bolted out of the pantry, my heart hammering and my thoughts a chaotic mess. What just happened? I didn't stop moving until I was halfway down the hallway, leaning against the wall to catch my breath. My lips tingled from the kiss, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't push the memory away. What the hell was I supposed to do now? 3 days later. God, what happened to you? I blinked barely at the figure standing in my doorway. Sergei Laurent, of course, because why wouldn't my rival, the man I'd spent days overthinking about, show up at my apartment when I looked like absolute death? I sniffled and tugged my blanket tighter around me, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "What are you doing here?" My voice was hoarse, and I sounded as bad as I looked. "You haven't been to the office for 3 days, Sergei said, his brows furrowing. I thought." He trailed off, his blue eyes scanning my disheveled form. "Never mind what I thought. You're sick." "No kidding, Sherlock," I mumbled, stepping aside to let him in. "Come on, before my neighbors start gossiping about why you're standing here." He followed me in, and I shuffled back to the couch, collapsing into a heap. Sergei, of course, looked annoyingly put together as he perched on the edge of the chair across from me. "You're not sick?" I asked, squinting at him. He smirked. "Europe's a lot colder than the States. That little pantry chill was nothing for me." I groaned and flopped against the cushions. "Of course, you're immune to everything. Why am I not surprised?" He chuckled softly, and for a moment, it felt nice, easy even, until his expression turned serious. "Ansel," he said, his tone quieter now. I wanted to apologize. "For what?" I asked, sitting up a little. "For kissing you without permission," he admitted, his voice steady, but softer than usual. I blinked at him, caught off guard. "Why did you kiss me, though?" He hesitated, his confident demeanor faltering. For the first time ever, Sergei Laurent looked shy. "I thought I was dreaming," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. "What?" I asked, my brows furrowing. He glanced up, his cheeks tingled with the faintest blush. "Because I've had this crush on you since, like, forever, and I thought it was one of my stupid dreams." I stared at him, stunned. "You dream of kissing me?" He nodded, barely predictable. I couldn't help the incredulous laugh that bubbled up. "Okay, where are the cameras? Where should I wave? There's no way Sergei friggin' Laurent had a crush on me." Before I could finish, Sergei surged forward, grabbing my face in both hands and kissing me. Hard, deep, my breath caught as the world tilted, my thoughts spinning out of control. By the time he pulled back, we were both breathless, and his blue eyes looked into mine with the intensity that made my heart skip. "Do you believe me now?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "You idiot," I squeaked, shoving at his chest. "You're going to get sick too." He laughed, his whole face lighting up. "Worth it, as long as you accept me." I stared at him, my heart doing somersaults. Then I smiled, bright and wide, and tugged him back towards me. "Your choice," I murmured, before kissing him again. At that moment, everything felt perfect. But the chaos in the past few days didn't matter. Of course, I knew the office gossip was going to be absolutely wild after this. But for now, I didn't care. Conclusion. Life after the pantry incident was different. Sergei and I didn't exactly hide what happened, and the office gossip was as wild as I expected, gave us knowing looks during meetings, and there was even a betting pool on how long we've been secretly dating. Turns out most of the team was shocked, but happy for us, especially once they realized our bickering was just tension. Honestly, it felt good to stop pretending. even if Sergei insisted on holding my hand in the break room, just to fluster me. And for us, we're figuring it out. It's not perfect, but having him by my side feels right. Rival or not, Sergei Laurent is mine, and I wouldn't change that for a thing. The end. Have you ever had a love-hate relationship with someone? Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.